For the past few weeks, this clip has been burning up on Tumblr.
You know, I have a queer kid.
You have a kid?
Gender fluid.
And you're cool with it?
I'm not a monster, Jake.
A lot of people started ripping it, making fun of it, making comments like, "Oh, good, the evil child murdering possessed doll said gay rights. Diversity wins." There were a lot of conversations about the performative action of this particular moment. And yeah, looking at just this bit out of context, I was kind of thinking the same thing too. I thought, what is the point of trying to make Chucky a progressive character? That being said, I had to just watch the TV show for myself. And I have to say, shockingly, surprisingly, in all earnesty, this scene, as well as the main character Jake's queerness, is handled with surprising sincerity in what really ends up being a really engaging, shockingly complex story. The first I had heard of this new Chucky TV series was when I kept seeing bus ads for it in my city here in Toronto, and I thought, oh God, I'm exhausted by this already. Didn't they just do a full reboot of this with Aubrey Plaza? I only watched about 20 minutes of that because I found it frankly insufferable, and I hated the idea of, instead of it being a possessed doll voiced by Brad Dourif, it was some kind of a defected evil AI that a jaded factory worker had made. In other words, 100% a different story, and I was not here for it. Now, I've never had a lot of love for the Child's Play series. I think the fact that a lot of people don't even know the franchise is called Child's Play, and people just know the name and the visual iconography of Chucky, says a lot about the franchise at whole. Even looking all the way back to the first one, it's never really been a critical darling. Quite in fact, none of them have a positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and not many of them have a super high fan score either. That being said, there is a lot of love for the character of Chucky, and that is undeniable. By extension, the visual look of Chucky, not just from the original Child's Play film, but of course, the incredible, fantastic, and gross-looking redesign of him for Bride of Chucky, and by proxy, Tiffany 2. So when I initially saw this clip, I thought, okay, what are they doing here? I've got to see this for myself. And I have to say, surprisingly, dumbfoundingly, shockingly, it is so good. It's really good. It is, I think, easily maybe the best thing that's ever come out of the franchise. And I went into it fully 100% expecting and willing to hate it. And now I look back on that and I'm like, I'm glad that I ended up watching it because I ended up really, really liking it. And that's why I just want to talk a little bit about it today. I don't want to spoil anything too much beyond the pilot, so I won't go much beyond that, but there are some really great twists and turns later in the series that I really don't want to spoil for anyone because if anything, I want this to bolster people's interest in the series. As someone who was never really big on the Child's Play train, the fact that this TV show does such a great job of not only reinventing the character, but also keeping continuity with all the previous films and even informing the audience, no matter what your level of knowledge is of this franchise, of what you need to know from the previous films. And one thing that's really fantastic about it is that it is written and directed by the man who started it all, Don Mancini. Chucky takes place in the franchise familiar town of Hackensack and centers on Jake, who in the first scene we see gets a good guy doll from a local yard sale. Now, Jake is no ordinary 8th grader, and I just want to pause here for a moment and say that what I love about this TV show is that he is an 8th grader who looks like an 8th grader. This show stars teenagers that really look like teenagers. Some of them really do look as young as 14, and I just have to say before I move forward, I highly appreciate that. We do not get that enough. So they made a very intentional choice to involve very young people in this TV show, and that does play heavily into the plot and the themes and the direction of this television show. So Jake is not like the other kids. He likes to play with dolls a lot, and maybe not in the more typical way. By play with dolls, I mean that he is making some kind of a Hydra sculpture out of different kinds of of baby dolls. And honestly, it's a pretty unique piece of work that you could probably also read into metaphorically with his character, perhaps. I mean, I'm no scholar, but there's probably something to say about a 14-year-old that is making a mass self-portrait sculpture out of baby dolls. I don't know. I'm not his therapist. He loves to listen to the podcast Hack and Slash, which is written and hosted by his secret crush, Devin. And that's one thing about the show is that Jake is gay. I don't know why I laughed when I said that. It's not funny. It's just that it's unexpected. Usually when queer characters are in stories like this, unfortunately, historically, they have been the butt of the joke, including the gay character in Bride of Chucky, who was seen as the butt of the joke and was sort of, I think he was the first character to die. So for them to take this direction is a very specific choice. And in some ways it's risky because if you're going to write about queer teens, you really kind of got to do it in the right way. You got to do it with the right amount of sensitivity, the right amount of modernism, also without taking it too overly seriously. And you got to play on those themes in a way that still feels relevant and fresh. And this is part of the reason I got to say I'm so surprised with this TV show is its handling of these kind of themes and topics. In a way, I feel like it almost reminds me of Degrassi in the way that it's just inherently getting it right with also age-appropriate children. So that is really wonderful. But this guy, he's weird as fuck. His crush Devin has this whole podcast about the history of violence in Hackensack and specifically references the Charles Lee Ray murders. Now, for those who are newer to this franchise, Charles Lee Ray is Chucky. Charles Lee Ray was a murderer who had his soul, using some sort of voodoo magic, transported into a good guy brand doll. And then like a million trillion things happened to him between the first film leading up to this one. But all you really need to know in the pilot is that there is a good guy doll. And yes, it is Chucky, and it does have Charles Lee Ray inside of him. I don't think that was ever in question from the very beginning of this pilot. His dad absolutely hates the doll, just about as much as he hates his son's sculpture. So his dad is homophobic, maybe not in a super overt, necessarily in-your-face way, but it is clear that he's not really comfortable with his son expressing himself. He is not particularly supportive of his art. He tells him in the pilot that he can't pay for this art class he really wants to take. So he and his father have a pretty frosty relationship. Later that night, Jake and his dad have dinner with Jake's uncle, which is his father's brother, his aunt, and his cousin, Junior, who's the same age as him and goes to high school with him. Now, Junior is kind of the polar opposite of him. He is popular and he is in sports and he is likable. He is a straight sport bro, and it's clear from the beginning that these two do not have a very nice relationship. They tend to naturally combat each other. In this particular scene, we see Junior being a little bit more antagonist too, in a vaguely homophobic way, to put it mildly.
The scouts are taking gays now. You should totally come check it out.
Junior?
What? It's true.
Junior is dating this girl, Lexi, who they go to school with. She is a classic bully who teases Jake mercilessly and seemingly without reason. And she does seem to also attack his lack of wealth and fortune. This is a little bit of a theme in the series. I'm not saying it's something that is so important that it carries us through the entire plot, but there is a little bit of this divide in how people treat Jake, especially considering the less wealthy background that he comes from. So things get kind of heated at the dinner table. This conversation comes up.
So, Jake, how is the sculpture coming along? Can we see it yet?
Soon. Andy Warhol once said, just because something's been thrown away doesn't make it garbage. Wasn't Warhol gay too?
Junior, stop it.
The dad really hates this. He shuts it down. He gets all angry. Likely galvanized by this conversation, Jake's father then goes upstairs and destroys his sculpture while screaming, no more dolls, Jake.
No more dolls, Jake. Ever.
Boy, this guy is in the wrong TV show. So Jake brings the doll to school, as if people didn't think that he was weird enough. I guess that he's doing this to keep it away from his dad, but it definitely doesn't help his image, at all. He turns away from the frog that he has to dissect for a second, and when he looks back, he finds it massacred, and everybody's all freaked out in shock. And again, this is really not helping Jake's case in terms of his popularity at school. This is the first of many gruesome and disturbing displays of violence we're going to see in the show. The show has quite a lot of weird, creative, visually gross and gory looking displays. And I love that. It works really, really well for the tone of this show, especially with the horror comedy. Also, everybody in the class receives a mass text linking a GoFundMe that Lexi has started in Jake's name. It's a very cruel move, and this will not be her last public act of humiliation against Jake, even just in this episode. So Jake receives a call from a stranger warning him about the doll after he posts about trying to sell it online. The caller mysteriously tells him to check the batteries, and this is when Jake first starts to get the inkling that something is different about his good guy doll. At the school talent show, which is unfortunately hosted by Lexi, she takes this chance to publicly berate Jake because she is a BICTH.
Is that Jake Wheeler? Sitting right across from you? Loser. Come on, Jake, don't be shy. Now's your chance to tell Dev and his mom what you really think.
And it goes on and on until a very familiar voice calls out.
Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
Chucky whispers into Jake's ear, clearly prompting him to move up towards the stage. So Chucky, pretending to be Jake, pretending to be Chucky, roasts this teenager within an inch of her life.
Apparently she's Botox curious. She's into Pokemon porn. And look, but she keeps Googling.
Why do my farts smell so good?
And Lexi's sister is absolutely fascinated with this talking doll. Now, I said I wouldn't talk about much from beyond the pilot, but I just want to say that Lexi's sister is such a strange, interesting character because she's really creepy, and there ends up being some really creepy child moments with Lexi's sister. I'm just going to put that out there. And the actress who plays her does a really good job of interacting with Chucky. After Jake gets in trouble for this whole little thing, his dad hits him and threatens him for talking about his sexuality.
Huh? You don't care that they think I'm weird. You just care that they know I'm a fag.
And you know what? Chucky is not here for it. Chucky said gay rights or something. So he ends up drinking the dad's booze and then throwing up all over the dad's feet and causing an electrocution, which is the first major death in this show. And it immediately sets such a good tone because it's really funny. It's kind of a gross out gag. It has this ridiculousness of seeing this Chucky puppet throw up all over the dad and then get him electrocuted to death. It's 50% funny, 50% gross, and that is perfect. It immediately sets the tone for what you can expect for this TV show. And this isn't even the best death. It's a really good one, but there's even better ones. Just throwing that out there. So Devin, the guy that Jake has a crush on, his mother is an investigator. And this is probably one of the more cliche bits about, a TV show about a small town murder, is there's like always a high school character that's the sheriff's child. Thinking of any TV show like this, like when I first watched Riverdale at a friend's house, one of my first questions I just said was, okay, so which one of these high schoolers is like the sheriff's son or something? And my friends burst out laughing because they were like, yeah, that guy on screen who also happens to be the gay one. So the guy that Jake has a crush on, well, his mother is a police investigator. And wouldn't you know it, she is investigating Jake's father's death. It's maybe not my favorite plot point of the TV show, but I do think it works. I still think they handle it well enough, but it's there and it works. I'll say that. So his father's death is written off as a freak accident, especially due to his father's intoxication. Jake is promptly moved into his uncle and aunt's house. So now he's going to be essentially roomies with Junior. Junior clearly does not like this. This is going to play huge into the rest of the show, his relationship with Junior and how it evolves over time. It's also important to note that talking about the wealth thing too, that his aunt and uncle live in an extravagantly large estate that also has some very impeccable and kind of foreboding dark colored production design. This show has really interesting use of production design and light, and I really appreciate it. The show has a specific look to it, which is nice. It's refreshing. So Junior's not crazy about this new living situation. This creates sort of a rivalry between the two, as well as suspicion of Jake because, you know, these strange things keep happening around him. In the end of the first episode, Chucky finally reveals his true nature.
Hi, I'm Chucky. And I'm your friend to the end. Heidi f***ing ho.
And essentially, we end it right there. It's a really great place to start off the show. It sets up almost all the major plot lines for the rest of the show, and I have to say, it kind of immediately got me hooked. Now, the TV show just finished airing its 8th episode and has already been renewed for a season 2. And I'm here for it. I really can't wait to see what they do in season 2. I'm not going to spoil anything about how season 1 ends, but it definitely has a very intentionally open-ended nature because I think that they suspected that they had a hit on their hands because they decided not to play it safe. They did not close off the story in a way that would equal a good series finale. This is definitely the beginning of a story, and I feel like this is a super smart move because A, you get to call the TV show Chucky. They're moving away from the branding of Child's Play. They're going into a new territory, and they're also trying to get new fans. And even though this show does specifically reference multiple different movies, it always does a very good job of doing these sort of flashbacks that catch you up. One other thing that I want to say here too, we see it a little bit in the pilot and we see it way more in the next few episodes. We also get more of Chucky's backstory, specifically what his childhood was like. And we see that he was a real creepy, messed up child, but we also begin to understand some of those circumstances of what might have brought him into this darker side of living, this sort of need and want to kill. It makes us sort of fear him more in a way, knowing that he's sort of almost this sort of, you know, seed of evil, if you will. But I am very excited to see where the television show goes next. And again, I just have to say, I'm so shocked by how good this show is. It's really engaging. It's well acted. It's well written. The teenagers are age appropriate. The show is aesthetically very pleasing. It has a slick soundtrack of modern music that both aims at a younger audience while still remaining palatable to older diehard fans. Though very occasionally, some of the musical bits can be slightly on the nose.
No one ever starts that way. This is how villains are made.
One of my favorite things about this television show is the absolute gorgeous puppetry, and there is lots of it. I am a huge fan of practical effects and puppetry. It is unfortunately a dying art, looking at you, Marvel, Disney, anything by Disney. The puppetry is just amazing. I don't want to spoil anything, but the same way that Bride of Chucky reinvented the look of the good guy doll, this TV show does one or two things that create what I think are kind of iconic looks in their making. They find a lot of creative ways to continue to renew and refresh that idea of what Chucky or who Chucky is. And I'm just so excited to see what they do next.